Hey, y'all. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peace Podcast. This is season 2, episode 31. Just give me a healthy partner, whatever that looks like. And so, we walk around the world looking for red flags, and it's just like when you know what your favorite car is, or you have, a certain type of shoe that you like, you'll start to see more of that thing because that's what you're focusing on. Well, the same thing is true when we're focusing on those red flags, right? So we focus more on what are the red flags that I'm looking for. We're going to start to see more things that look like red flags. And even if they aren't actually red flags, they're areas where someone is working and growing, we'll paint them red just because that's what we are specifically looking for and what we're going to see more of. And so today I thought it would be important to talk about what are some of those signs of a healthy partner. And I can only share my personal experience, which is the whole whatever that looks like part of the podcast, because your experience may be very different from mine. And hopefully you can extract some of the green flags that I've found. And maybe not all of these are green flags for you or even things that you're specifically looking for, but maybe the message and the understanding behind them will be. And so, as you know, I for the better part of my life, which wasn't better in experience, but better in longer, I had been in toxic and um, abusive relationship, and so I went from, overt narcissists to covert narcissists, back to overt narcissists. And so I've experienced these type of people over and over and over again. And so when getting into my current situation, I knew what I was looking for. Like I had specifics, and I even had gotten to the point where I was like, if I can't, if this isn't presented in front of me, then I don't want it at all. Like I'm perfectly fine with being by myself. And like, at 42, you kind of get there. You're like, well, I've done life this way for a while now, and I can continue to do it this way, and it's going to be fine. Like, I'll be fine. But I want to give you 8 signs of a healthy partner that I noticed in this relationship and in conversation with my closest friends, that they were able to notice inside of their healthy relationship with their partner. And the first one is they pray. If you're not a God-fearing person, there's going to be a message inside of this, even if that's not your story. I pray that you will be one day because I know that it has been, being a God-fearing person has been what has kept me going for such a long time. But if you're not, you're probably going to find a message inside of this. So, what I've found with people who are prayerful is not only are they able to cover you in meditation and words of affirmation and reach out, to God in prayer and pray over the things that you're experiencing. You're having that twofold. So it's not just you hoping in faith and praying for things, but you have someone doing that over you and for you as well. But the other thing that I found inside of the finding someone who's prayerful is that they hold themselves accountable to something higher than just this relationship. So, somebody who has a strong relationship with God is going to assess the reality and assess their behaviors based on not just is she going to be upset if I do this, but is this what God requires of me when I hold this title or am in this position in her life? And so there are a lot of checks and balances that I don't even see because I'm, working on the checks and balances of the relationship in myself. But a healthy person is going to work on who they're being accountable to, which in this instance would be God, and then also what they need to do given their core wounds and all of the things that they're experiencing to make sure that they're being that type of person. And so that's what I found with someone who's prayerful. The second one is they have stuff, but they're working on it. So someone who's healthy is going to know that they aren't 100% free of accountability ever. So when you date someone and they talk about how horrible all of their exes were and how everybody was this horrible person and they paint themselves as a victim, they have to villainize someone else in order for their experience to victimize them. that person is incapable of taking accountability for their own part in the process. Because even though I don't victim shame at all, because I know what that feels like and I've been in toxic relationship, I will tell you that there are parts of those relationships that I do take accountability for because they were me. Like choosing the type of people that I chose, me. Continuing to try to trudge on in a relationship because I didn't want to fail again, me. So you have to take accountability for the things that are yours. And if your partner is not doing that, if they haven't really assessed any of their stuff, then they're going to be toxic inside of the relationship because they're going to expect you to fill that void of whatever their stuff is creating. So people who can identify that they have stuff and are willing to work on that stuff are one, self-reflective, two, accountable, and three, solution based so that they can work on whatever that thing is. So they have core wounds. They're familiar with their core wounds, but they also know how to tell you about their core wounds and work on them. Do the work, do the things, have the meditation sessions, have the conversations around what they know to be true about themselves and how they plan to work on it and how they have started to work on it up until that point. The third one is they can do conflict well. So this one is a really tough one because I have not always been the type of person who can do conflict. I would avoid conflict because I didn't want for the conflict to threaten the relationship. I didn't want for the conflict to threaten their perspective of me. So I would avoid it altogether, which, as we know, builds resentment because you pent up all of that anger and then eventually it has to go somewhere. So it either stays within and starts killing you or it goes without and it's explosive because it's either imploding or exploding. And so when you're dating somebody who can do conflict well, they don't always have to be right. There's not always a one side and the other side. Someone recently in a podcast, and I really wish that I remembered who this was, but I don't, equated it to, you can be playing the same game and if you're in relationship, you can be playing this, be in the same relationship, playing the same game, but you're not on the same team. So she equated it to you can play tennis, but you can be on opposite sides of the court and you're hitting the ball back and forth to one another, hoping that one of you wins, right? Like I hope that I win, you hope that you win. But when you're in relationship and you're willing to do conflict and you're willing to work for the relationship, then you're playing the same game. You're still playing tennis, but you are committed to playing a doubles match as opposed to against your opponent. And so you're on the same team, and whatever you're playing against is the conflict, the reason for the conflict in the first place. But if someone can't do conflict well, as in they avoid it altogether, or when they have conflict, they explode and they start name calling and doing all of these things to hurt you, then that's going to be a red flag in a relationship. If someone can do conflict well, they are able to bring that thing to you and say, when this happened, I felt like this. And in the future, I would love for this to be the case. And then they say, what's your perspective on this? Because everyone who's included in the relationship has to be able to share their perspective, especially when you're inside of conflict. And then the perspective is shared, and there's no desire to fight against the other person, to change or alter someone's perspective, but just to say, I see how you could see it differently than me. How can we come to a compromise so that in the future, this isn't a conflict for us again? And so you come to some sort of, but if you're doing conflict in a way that's avoiding it or exploding during it, it never gets resolved because that same conflict continues to happen in different forms. The fourth one is they don't view you as competition, but as part of their team. And I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. You're not competing against each other. You're not fighting against each other. If you win, they win because the relationship wins when you're on the same team. This is the type of person who is going to look at the situation and say, what's the problem? How can we work together as a team to be against the problem and not necessarily each other? Someone who does it the opposite way, just to kind of draw a parallel so that you can see the differences between these two, would say, you do this, you're the problem. I need it to be done this way. right? And so that's where it becomes a little bit of a push-pull dynamic, because you have, I need it to be done this way, I need it to be done this way. And in order for it to be solved, one person has to get their way. Whereas if they don't view you as competition and they view you as someone who's on the same team as them, not only will they not work against you, but they'll also be able to access your strengths in the relationship. So if I know I'm not good at something in the relationship, I can access my partner's strength in that area. And hopefully they do have a strength in that area, because, like, for instance, I'm a planner, you know, the relationship that I'm in, he's a man of spontaneity. And so sometimes that could create a conflict, but we've learned that he can be spontaneous in the decision, but there has to be a plan somewhere inside of it, unless there's no need for a plan at all, and then we can do it that way. But that's being on the same team and knowing when you can give and take, instead of enforcing the push and pull, because it's never going to work. Someone is going to be angry, someone's going to feel like they need to win, and the dynamic just becomes a fight instead of being on the same team. The fifth one is they can self-assess. I again alluded to this earlier, but when someone can sit in the space after a feeling or a trigger and say, is this a me problem, a you problem, or an us problem? That person is really capable of compromise and conflict resolution. So the reason for asking those questions is this a me problem, a you problem, or an us problem, is something could happen. Somebody could say something and it offends you. That offense may have not been intentional, right? And so you look at the situation and you say, is this a me problem? Is this triggering me because of my core wound? Is this a you problem? Did you try to hurt me intentionally because of your core wounds? Or is this an us problem? Is this a dynamic that we dance over and over and over again? And now it's a relational situation and pattern that we need to take a look at and change. And so when you are someone who can do that, when you are with someone who can do that, then what ends up happening is you address yourself, you address the core wounds in the other person, and then you address the relationship instead of fighting your partner. So if they can do that, huge green flag, because they are able to look at the situation from an aerial view instead of having to be in it with their weapons out trying to fight the person that they're with. This number 6 is they apologize. And this isn't one of those, I apologize that I made you feel that way. It is more if my partner's hurt, is the behavior that I just exhibited a hill that I'm willing to die on? And sometimes it might be. But if my partner is hurt regardless, I'm going to address their feelings. Now, when you're in a toxic relationship, you might find that you're with somebody who uses this to the nth degree to their advantage. So you have to really be careful with, is this person using this to manipulate me? Their feelings are always hurt, because, again, going back to that one where I said, they have stuff that they're willing to work on. If somebody's not willing to work on their stuff, that void that they have there, that emptiness that they have there, they're going to expect you to fill it, right? And so you have to know that when you're in a toxic relationship, that is what's happening. So when it's a green flag, though, it's they don't just say, okay, let me see if I was wrong, and let me determine if it was heavy enough for me to have to apologize. They just say, oh my gosh, my partner's hurt and I don't like to see them that way. I'm really sorry that that happened. I'm really sorry that this was the way that our day was today. What can we do in the future to make it better? Or, like, even in my current situation, like, he'll apologize when stuff doesn't have anything to do with him because my circumstance is hurting me. And so he doesn't like to see that. So he'll say, I'm really sorry that's happening to you. And he didn't have anything to do with it. So somebody who apologizes is more concerned with your well-being than they are with the dynamic of the circumstance, whether they've created it or not. The seventh one is they allow space for humanity. You have a past, you've made mistakes, you have stuff, and you are a human being and a person. And if you're in relationship with somebody who does not allow your humanity to show, they need a puppet, not a partner. And actually, in my last relationship, he was actually told that by one of his friends, because I had had a bad day, and I was just not in a space to just deal with people in general. But I just didn't want my little funk to like bleed over onto him. And so I told him that, but then he wanted to have the conversation because he hadn't talked to me all day. And then in the conversation, it was, I just feel like your bad mood is making me think differently about you. And so then he talked to one of his friends and they were like, if she's not allowed to have a bad mood, then do you want a partner or a puppet? And I was like, what? She's right. And so your partner has to allow you to be human. You're not always going to look your best. They should still think you're beautiful. You're not always going to act your best, but they should still see the beauty in who you are. You're not always going to be 100% on your game. They may, you may make mistakes. They may prefer you to do something and today you missed the mark on that. They prefer for you to greet them when they walk in the door, and you're so exhausted and frustrated that you completely miss the mark on that thing, but you're human and they allow you to be human. And so when you're in a relationship with somebody who doesn't allow space for humanity, you can't be sick. You can't look like, crazy one day because you're not feeling well, or you don't feel like doing your hair, you don't feel like doing your makeup. You can't walk around in sweatpants and a t-shirt because they're probably going to think something negative about that, unless they're one of those people who like sweatpants and a t-shirt. They expect you to be the vision of the things that they've seen on the internet when it comes to your intimate relationships. Like, it's just all this performance based. Sorry, my computer is apparently about to die. There it goes. It's all this performance based mess. And people have to allow space for your humanity. And so if you're in a relationship with somebody who holds you to the fire and shames you and blames you and makes you feel horrible for anything that's outside of the pedestal that they've put you on, that person is not ready for a relationship because they're still living in a fantasy world. Number 8, they communicate and comprehend, right? So these are the people who hold space for different viewpoints. So it's not just, I'm telling you how I feel, you should understand how I feel, you should see it my way. It is 100%, here's my perspective. It's kind of like that example I was giving you before. Like, what's your perspective about what happened today? Because here's how I feel about it. And even in the midst of your anger, you can value and gain some value in someone else sharing their perspective, because when they share it, it might put a light on for you that goes, oh, I didn't even think that that was a thing, right? And so when they communicate, they're communicating openly and honestly about the way they feel about something, about, their experience with this thing, about their triggers, about their core wounds, and they give you space to do the same thing. Comprehension and communication are not the same thing. You ever had a teacher who was really good at lecturing, but everybody failed the test? It's because communicating, they were really good at that, talking at somebody, right? But communication requires two people. So inside of communication needs to be reflection. And just like when that teacher's up there lecturing, they might be giving you the information, but if they don't accept your reflection at the end of that lecture or lesson, they don't know if you've learned it. Just because they've taught it doesn't mean you've learned it. So comprehension is really restating, paraphrasing what the other person has said so that you are clear and you've gained clarity around how they feel, their perspective, how you feel, your perspective, and what's going to happen as a result, as a solution. If you have somebody who shuts down and isn't actively listening while you're talking, one, I would argue that that's not really communication, because you should be expectant that the person is listening and checking for their understanding while you're having that communication. But secondly, no one's comprehending anything if they're not even hearing the words. So you have to make sure that the person that you're with is not just in the conversation to think about what they can say next, to think about how they can defend themselves, to think about how they can push back, but is actively listening to you so they can comprehend what's going on in this relationship. Again, it's taking that aerial view, taking themselves out of the situation and just saying, if I were looking at this from a different perspective and I wasn't in it, what would I see? And that person is going to be really good at doing life with you. And then a bonus number 9 is you feel filled up instead of depleted when you leave spaces that this person is in, right? So when you're on the phone together, when you're in a space together, when you have to leave to go to work, your cup runneth over as opposed to being completely depleted because of the energy you've had to expend in that relationship. So I hope that this is helpful. I hope that you are able to see what your green flags are and what you need to experience in a relationship. Some of these are universal, but all of them may not be. And so really thinking about what are your core wounds? What are the things that you need in relationship to make you feel safe and appreciated and seen and like a partner? And what are those green flags that you're looking for to ensure that you find that in a partner instead of writing down all the red flags so that all you can see is this filtered lens of little red flags everywhere you go? Thank you again for tuning in. Don't forget the event or gathering that I'm going to be speaking at that's in Texas. I'll put the details in the comments. This is it up here on the screen. It is a sacred gathering for healing. If you're anywhere near Houston, I would love to see you there. And remember that sharing this video, liking and subscribing to my social media platforms really helps to get the word out and make sure that you don't miss any of the content. But also, knowledge gained and kept to yourself is selfish. But when you share the knowledge that you have gained through any platforms with other people, it helps them to break free from the bondage that they're in. And if you're anything like me, you don't want anyone else to have to experience what you experienced for as long as you experienced it. So if you love this podcast, go ahead and leave a 5-star rating. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and share it with some people that you know that it might help break free from their bondage. Thank you again for tuning in, and I'll see you again next time.